Welcome everybody to another At Home with Theosophy. This is the third class and we are exploring the book Karma by Annie Besant. We are going to see tonight some details as to how karma is produced. As we have been explored, the concept of karma, although today is more common among people, you hear the word karma even on TV, yet the mechanism is not necessarily known, and many people just replace their idea of a god punishing bad people and rewarding good people with the idea of karma, as if karma were just more or less the same. So we are exploring with this book the mechanism and the complexity of karma. So let us go on with Annie Besant's explanation. Today the main subject is the making of karma in detail, because in the previous class we saw the general idea of karma. So now we are going to see in a more detailed way. Annie Besant says the soul in man, the ego, or sometimes, because this comes from the Greek word ego, which means I-ness. In Theosophy we have a higher sense of I-ness, which is a spiritual I-ness, that's the higher ego, or some people say higher ego, to differentiate it from the lower ego, which is the one that is normally talked about in psychology, for example. The lower ego is a sense of I am this personality. So we can pronounce it ego when we are talking about the higher sense of I-ness, the source of our sense of I-ness. So the soul in man, the ego, the maker of karma, must be recognized by the student as a growing entity, a living individual, who increases in wisdom and in mental stature as he treads the paths of his aeonian evolution. The idea is that this ego is, we have the divine spark, which is one universal consciousness that is at the basis of every kind of manifestation in the universe. In the Theosophical view, there is a unity from which everything comes. When that unity expresses on the mental plane, then it assumes the form of different individualities, and that is what we call the ego in each one of us. So in a certain sense, you can say that the soul in each human being is the divine oneself trying to experience the universe through the different manifestations that are each one of us. So on the mental plane, this divine spark is learning how to relate to the world of manifestation. And although in its essential nature it's always perfect and is beyond any evolution, on the planes of manifestations, it is in a process of learning and growing and self-discovery. We cannot get into this too deeply because that is a whole class in itself. But keep that in mind to understand what Annie Besant is saying. So she says that the ego, the divine spark while working on the mental plane and the lower planes, is an entity that grows, that evolves. And the fundamental identity of the higher and lower manas must be constantly kept in mind. So the soul is the source of what we call mind. At the level of the soul, this mind is omniscient. Blavatsky used to use the phrase inherent omniscience, meaning that on the mental plane, whatever is presented to the perception of the soul can be perceived as it really is, at least on that plane. There is no possibility of confusion or misunderstanding. Now, when the soul incarnates in a body and tries to express through the physical brain, that is what we call the lower mind. So the higher mind would be the real mind of the soul, and the lower mind is the mind that we are using right now, which is just a fragment of this omniscience that is our true nature. And this fragment is conditioned and is unable to perceive but the appearance of things. Now, anyway, although there is such a difference between this very limited mind and the omniscient mind that is the mind of the soul, both are one single principle. So Annie Besant says that is something important to keep in mind. Many times when we think of the soul, we think of something up there kind of attached to us, as if it were a balloon floating there and is attached to us, and we are the real self that has attached a soul or has attached a spirit or whatever. And that is not the case. We are the soul trying to express through the brain. So this mind is the imperfect and limited expression of what we are, that is the soul, and even more beyond that is the spirit trying to express itself as a soul and then as a personality. So Annie Besant says, for convenience sake, we distinguish between them, the higher mind and the lower mind. But the difference is a difference of functioning, activity, and not of nature. So when we are on perceiving on our own plane, the mental plane, then we are this higher mind. When we begin to perceive through the body, we are the lower mind. So the higher mind, or the higher manas is a Sanskrit word as we saw, is manas working on the spiritual plane, in possession of its full consciousness of its own past. On the level of the soul, all the past, all the different experiences that the soul had during all the incarnations are present. They are actual memory, so to say, for the soul. But that is not the case when we incarnate. So she says the lower manas is a manas working on the psychic or astral plane with all its activities intermingled with and colored by the desired nature. The home of the soul is this mental plane. We saw these planes on the first class. Then a lower plane is the astral plane, the plane that is the realm of the emotions and the desires and the passions. So when the soul begins to express on the lower planes, the first thing that happens is that its ability to perceive, to understand, becomes entangled with the emotions, passions, and fears and desires. And then this psyche that we call it, this mind/emotion, expresses itself through the body, through the brain and the nervous system. So Annie Besant says that when the lower manas is this manas trying to express through the astral plane and is colored by the desired nature, it is in possession only of a portion of the total manasic consciousness. Our real consciousness, what can be expressed is only a fragment. And she says this portion consists, for the vast majority of people, of a limited selection from the more striking experiences of the one incarnation then in progress. So what is available to our mind normally for most people is just the main experiences we have had so far in our life. That is when we have to face life, when we try to understand something or to learn how to approach something, we unless we have access to the higher mind, to the intuition and this spiritual nature, which is the aim of the spiritual path, to gain this access. Unless we do have some access to that, we face life based on the experience, or as Annie Besant says there, the most striking experience that we have had so far in life. And that is obviously a very limited instrument to use. And these experiences, of course, they condition our perception. You know, if we had a difficult childhood, even though as adults we may be in a completely different situation and that has nothing to do with the childhood, yet that experience conditions the perception in the present. And you would think, how is that possible? What is past is past, and yet that conditions the experience of the present and requires spiritual work to get beyond it. So Annie Besant says, for the practical purpose of life, as seen by most people, the lower manas, this lower mind, the mind that we use every day, is the I, and is what we term the personal ego. The voice of conscience, vaguely and confusedly regarded as supernatural, as the voice of God, is for them the only manifestation of the higher manas on the psychic plane. So this still voice, that voice, so to say, that tells us what we should not do, the voice of conscience, is actually a reflection of the experience of the soul, the higher ego. The voice of conscience is very important, but actually it cannot guide us into how to face new experiences, because it is the echo, so to say, of the experiences of the past. So when a person is going to do something that as a soul he or she already knows that is wrong, there will be this voice that says, don't do that, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't act in this way. And many people just disregard it, and if we disregard it constantly, then we stop hearing it. So this is an important factor in the guidance as to how to live, but it is an incomplete factor. It cannot tell us what to do in new situations. For that, we need to develop the intuition. It is the intuition, the one that can bring a new knowledge. But nevertheless, the conscience is an important guiding aspect for the personality. So this is what is readily available for anybody, no matter what his or her spiritual evolution. Of course, the more experience the soul has, the wiser this conscience will be, but at their own level, each person has access to this conscience. And as I said, if they don't pay attention to it, then it becomes atrophied, or however you say that, it becomes inactive. So Annie Besant says, but the student must realize that the lower manas is one with the higher. So this is important to set up the idea of how karma works. She says, if this be clearly understood, the sense of injustice to the personal ego in its succession to its karmic inheritance will disappear, for it will be realized that the ego that made the karma reaps the karma. The laborer that sowed the seed gathers in the harvest. Though the clothes in which he worked as sower may have worn out during the interval between the sowing and the reaping. So basically the seeds, the karmic seeds that were sowed in a previous life may be reaped in the next life, and although the personality is different, the ray of consciousness that was working through the previous personality and that is working through this one now is the same. So even though From a personal point of view, we may think that it is unfair that because a different personality did something, now we have to reap that effect. From a deeper point of view, it is always us, the ones that are either working through the previous personality or now working through this personality. In the early stages of the ego's growth, the mental images he generates will be mostly of the passional class, and hence the astral mental images will be violent and short-lived. We have to remember that in the process of evolution, when the human experience begins, the primitive human beings inherits the animal nature. As science knows, the physic or the human form is derived from the animal evolution. So the beginning of the human evolution is still close to the animal experience. And at the beginning, what guides the mind into doing this or that is the emotional aspect. And when this is the case, the mental images or the thought forms that are produced are maybe strong at the moment, but they are very short-lived because they have very little of a manasic component. They have very little of mind in it. But then she says, according as manasic elements enter into the composition of the mental image, will be the endurance of the astro-mental. Remember, the mental image is the image that is on the mental body, and the astro-mental image is this thought form that emanates from this image. Every time that the mental image is activated, there is a thought form that is emanated. So that's the difference. Now, the more mentality or the more self-consciousness is there in a particular mental image, the longer will be the thought form. And this is even recognized by regular law. When if a person commits a crime in a fit of passion, that crime is regarded as less serious than when a person did it with the full mental capacity, with planning and premeditation. And that's a reflection of how karma also sees these things. When there is a manasic, the more manasic element is there somewhere or in a certain reaction, the more responsibility there is for that action, because the thought form that is created is stronger and more lasting, and it will have more effect on the mental plane that it would have otherwise. So this is a factor in how karma is created. Steady, sustained thought will form clearly defined mental images, and correspondingly strong and enduring astro-mental images or thought forms. So Annie Besant says, let us now study the making of karma as a cause, how the karmic causes are generated by way of the mental image. During a man's life, he forms an innumerable assemblage of mental images. Some are strong, clear, continually reinforced by repeated mental impulses. Others are weak, vague, just formed and then, as it were, forsaken by the mind. Remember that any mental image that is produced even once stays on the mental body. Now, if a mental image becomes dominant in the life of a person, that mental image develops more and is very active. If a mental image is just is not really active, then it stays as a little seed, which in the future may be fed and developed. At the death of the soul, the soul finds itself possessed of myriads of these mental images, and they vary in character as well as in strength and definiteness. Some are of spiritual aspiration, some of purely intellectual, some are emotional and passional, some are from bodily appetites stimulated by uncurbed desire. So we have all these different kinds of mental images produced as a result of different kinds of stimulation. The soul just after death is encumbered with its complete body of desire, and all the mental images formed by kama-manas is the lower mind, that are of a gross and animal nature, are powerful on the lowest levels of this astral world. We explored this in our last At Home with Theosophy, when the physical body is left behind at the moment of what we call death. Then the soul finds itself enveloped or wrapped in the emotional body. And then it begins to perceive the astral world through the matter that constitutes the emotional body. So what happens is that the grossest matter is the first thing that is available for the soul. So if the person fed these denser kind of vibrations, desires and passions and selfishness, then that becomes the organ of perception of the soul on the astral plane. And of course, what if we put blue glasses, we see everything tainted by the blue color. So if the soul perceives through these lower emotions, it relates to the astral plane from that fear or jealousy or passion. But in a person that is more evolved, even if here and there these emotions may have a place in consciousness, when they are not the center of consciousness, then after death they are not strong enough to generate this kind of veil around the soul, and the soul remains unconscious of that aspect of the astral plane. So Annie Besant says that a poorly developed soul will dwell on these images and act them out, thus preparing itself to repeat them again physically in its next life. So just in the same way that, for example, when we go to sleep and something happened that produced an emotional impact, you see that the tendency of the emotional body is to keep repeating the emotional impact. And that is exactly what happens after death. When the physical body is left behind, the soul finds itself in this emotional body, and there is the tendency to repeat the main emotions and the main desires and passions that were important during life. Now, with each repetition, there is a strengthening of that particular tendency. And that is the problem. That is why every spiritual teaching talk about trying to work on the lower nature, on the desires and the passions while we are alive. Because after death, we cannot work on them anymore. And they will become actually increased by this constant repetition. As we are going to see later, this also happens with the good qualities. The good qualities are also reinforced after death. So when the soul comes back again, there will be at the level of the personality a stronger tendency to do the wrong thing, but also there will be a deepening of wisdom not to do that. And in this way, as evolution goes on, there is a point where the struggle between the lower nature and the higher nature becomes very evident. At the beginning, the higher nature is very feeble to affect the personality. So all these things, the lower nature keeps on getting increased, but there is no inner conflict because the higher nature cannot do anything to oppose it. But as evolution goes on and the higher nature awakens, then there is a period of struggle between the soul and the lower nature. So this is, as I said, why it is important to work on all these things during life, so that after death we are not going to be reinforcing the negative aspect or the lower aspect of our nature, but on the contrary, the post-mortem experience becomes a deepening in wisdom and peace and understanding and poise, etc. Then as the soul rises from the lower levels of the astral plane to the higher, the mental images built from the materials of the lower levels lose these elements, thus becoming latent in consciousness, capable of existing but out of material manifestation. So eventually, all these emotions and lower emotions and passions that were active in the soul, they die away. Not too different from what happens on the physical plane. For example, if we want to get rid of a vice, what we have to do is to starve the vice, basically. I mean, unless we have access to wisdom, to understanding, to awareness, then there is another tool that helps us get rid of a habit. But in the normal working of consciousness at the stage of evolution in which most humanity is now, the way to get rid of a habit is just by starving it out. And eventually the tendency to do that disappears. On the astral plane, the same happens. These things kept being repeated, but since there is no way to satisfy the desires, eventually the desire is starved and disappears. But the seed remains always there. So when the soul comes back into incarnation, the seed will be there and can be awakened again. But for the time being, as the soul goes higher into the planes, this lower nature becomes latent. So this is a way that nature generates so that the higher consciousness after death has the opportunity to see at things without the constant conditioning of the lower nature. So because the lower nature dies off faster than the higher, then there is this natural process of purgation, and the soul has the opportunity to learn in a way that is not being conditioned by the lower, as I said. So the Kamarupic vesture, this is the emotional body, is purified of its grosser elements as the lower ego is drawn upwards or inwards towards the Devachanic region. Devachan is a word used in the Theosophical literature for this stage in the post-mortem process that is similar to the ideas of heaven or paradise to a certain extent. The real concept is quite different, but it has some common elements in the sense that in this state of consciousness, in Devachan, there is no room for suffering or the lower nature or conditioning. So in that sense, it's similar to the idea of paradise. Freed from the time from these lower elements, the soul passes on into Devachan, where it spends a time proportionate to the wealth or poverty of its mental images, pure enough to be carried into that region. So remember, we have all kinds of mental images. Some of them are connected to lower forms of energy or thoughts or emotions, and those can be active only on the lower planes. As the soul goes to the higher planes, then all these seeds become latent, and the ones that are active are only the mental images that are in tune with these higher planes. So if during life a person generated these seeds, these mental images connected to the spiritual nature, to things related to love, compassion, peace, joy, wisdom, then the soul has those seeds to work on the devachanic plane. But if the person never generated these mental images, then there is nothing that the soul can really reap from that personality, and there is a process of incarnation far faster than if there is something that the soul can actually assimilate on the higher planes. So here in Devachan, the soul finds again every one of its loftier efforts, however brief it may have been, however fleeting, and here it works upon them, building out of these materials powers for its coming lives. So the love for children, the love for the country, even these kind of feelings of love that are still very personal, they become some kind of food for the soul. Of course, the more impersonal love becomes, then the greater is what the soul can really assimilate on the devachanic plane. But even the regular goodwill that a person may show is enough to produce some kind of assimilation in devachan. So Annie Besant says the devachanic life is one of assimilation. The experiences collected on earth have to be worked into the texture of the soul, and it is by this that the ego grows. Its development depends on the number and variety of the mental images it has formed during its earth life and transmuted into their appropriate and more permanent types. So it's in Devachan that these mental images, as she is going to explain, become part of the soul. At the beginning they are just intentions, they are just thoughts, they are just the realization, for example, that we should help somebody. But it is in Devachan when that began as a thought, as a realization, now becomes a part of the soul and becomes a power to help, a power to understand. She goes on saying, gathering together all the mental images of a special class, it extracts from them their essence. By meditation, it creates a mental organ and pours into it as faculty the essence it has extracted. So in life we have, for example, many different situations in which we have to show loyalty. It may be the loyalty as it is shown to our family, our parents or wife or children, loyalty to a cause, loyalty to a job, whatever kind of loyalty is needed to show in life. If the person has this tendency to show loyalty, then after death all these experiences are gathered, and the essence of it, meaning the ability to be loyal, the realization for the need of loyalty, is generated as a power in the soul. As Annie Besant says there, it's like a mental organ is created on the mental plane that in the next incarnation will be able to express this loyalty in a far better way in any situation in life. So she says, for instance, a man has formed many mental images out of aspirations for knowledge and effort to understand subtle and lofty reasonings. In his Devachan, he works on all these mental images and evolves them into capacity, so that his soul returns to earth with a higher mental apparatus than it before possessed, which with much increased intellectual powers, able to achieve tasks for which before it was utterly inadequate. This is the transformation of the mental images, by which they cease to be images created and worked on by the soul to become its powers, part of its very nature. So during a lifetime, it's in the Mahatma letters. It's a book that gathers some letters that Blavatsky's teachers sent to some early theosophists. They say that the physical plane is the plane of causes, and then when we die, the experience on the inner planes is those are worlds of effects, meaning that whatever can be achieved in the after death life depends on what was sowed in the physical life. So in this case, when we make an effort in any direction, that effort will become some kind of ability or opportunity in the future, as we are going to say. It will, for the most part, it will produce results in the future after the soul had the opportunity to assimilate it. So most of the growth, especially in the normal person, I mean by normal in the common people at this point in evolution, most of the growth is really done after the physical life is over, when the soul can assimilate, has the possibility of leaving behind the physical body, leaving behind the emotions and the lower mind, or the lower aspects of the mind, and can focus on the essence of the experience. Now, as evolution goes on, this process that happens in Devachans for most people can happen in the physical life for the spiritual aspirant. When we start living in a way with self-awareness, when we start living thinking over the things that happen in life, when we start having moments for meditation or reflection, when we start doing all that, then the soul can assimilate the lessons in life even while the soul is incarnated. So this is what sometimes you will see in the Theosophical literature, the idea that we need to have the Devachan in life, and this is what is meant, that we can learn during life, so that doesn't have to happen in the post-mortem process, in Devachan. Ed raised his hand. Let's see, what do you want to comment, Ed?
So this is interesting. So in Devachan, we develop capacities for better and higher thought processes and behavior. And so does this imply that when people are acting badly, we should feel compassion for them because they don't have the capacity to act any better?
Yes, definitely. That's the idea of the whole idea of the spiritual path, when it is said that we should have compassion and all this, is based on what you just said. No person wants to be, a bad person or an evil person, because every one of us is a fragment of the divine, and fragment, not that the divine is fragmented, but it's an expression of the divine, which in every single person the divine is trying to express itself in the best possible way and to gain awareness of its true nature. So when that doesn't happen, it's just because there is not enough experience and ability to counteract this natural tendency that is produced at the beginning of evolution towards the selfish point of view. Remember, as I mentioned, we start the human experience with all the physical tendencies that have preserved the body, the tendencies to self-interest and self-defense, and then the mind is added, a mind that is not skillful in relationship to relating to a body, and then the mind just follows the tendencies of the body and the emotions, and then a tendency that in an animal is normal to be aggressive when it has to be, then the mind begins to exacerbate that aggressiveness. So definitely when a person does something wrong, or when we do something wrong, it's just because we cannot help it. And then the fact of doing wrong things, the first victim of an evil action is the doer of the action, not the one that is a victim of that action. Of course, all this is difficult to see when we cannot perceive this, when we don't have enough experience as a soul. But at least as a concept, it's important to keep it in mind, because that opens a possibility to see the world in a different way. So the person that has indulged in wrong actions, then on the astral plane will keep on increasing those wrong actions. And the next lifetime, it will be harder to deal with, unless at the same time the person was trying to do good things so that they can become powers in the soul. But any wrong action done will become a point of resistance in the future, and the point of more trouble. This is just how evolution works, because if it weren't like that, then the soul would never try to transcend these things. We try to transcend the evil because the evil produces suffering. So unfortunately, it's how it works, especially at a certain point in evolution. There is a point in evolution where there is this struggle. Before that, as I said, the soul has very little say, and there is no inner conflict. Then, after the period of struggle, the soul is strong enough not to indulge in the lower nature, in the whims of the lower nature. There is no much struggle there. But in between is the place of struggle. So yes, everybody that really sees all this naturally feel this compassion that you are talking about. So now Annie Besant, with this foundation, she starts examining how things or the effect of certain attitudes in the next lifetime. So for example, talking about aspirations, she says, if a man desires to possess certain qualities that he doesn't have, he can ensure their development by deliberately willing to acquire them, persistently keeping their acquirement in view. For desire and aspiration in one life become faculty in another, and the will to perform becomes the capacity to achieve. So this is true on all levels. A person may want just to be smarter and just trying to learn and to think will inevitably result in a deepening of the ability to think in a future life. But this is also true with the spiritual aspect. if we want to discover, to dwell in our true nature, to discover truth, to realize what we really are, even if it seems that we can't at the moment, the effort in that direction will inevitably result either later in this life or in the next life in the ability to perceive the world in that way, from that point of view. That's why many spiritual teachers, they say, just act as if you could perceive this. Just, try to do it. Make an effort. And in doing that effort, even if you don't succeed, you will succeed because of the process that we saw. So even if there are many reasons why a result may be manifested in this particular life or in the next one. At the level of the soul, there is no much difference between this life, the next life. Time is completely different. It's a question of just of development. But things won't happen if we don't try. So the idea is that we should always try to relate to the world with the highest conception that we can sustain, that we can conceive of. So try to see what your ideal way is to relate to the world, to understand the world and yourself, and make efforts in that direction. And then the ability, even if you cannot perceive it at the time, the ability will increase inevitably. Then she talks about thinking. So far we talked about aspirations, the desire to do something that we are not able to at the moment. Then she talks about thinking, the regular thinking. She says mental images which have been constantly repeated but are not of the aspiring character, of the longing to achieve more than the feeble powers of the soul permit, become tendencies of thought, grooves into which mental energy runs easily and readily. So, the idea of we become what we think, or what we think we become, is that all this kind of, if the thought or the mental activity is directed towards the attainment of something that is beyond us at the moment, then we develop that ability eventually in this life or the next life. If we are constantly thinking of something, not necessarily an aspiration, but we just have a particular habit of thought, then that habit of thought will become more and more marked. Every time we think of something in a certain way, we generate a channel through which the mental activity will naturally flow. And we can see this in our life, even when you are, or see, for example, a scientist, because he thinks for so long in that particular way, becomes unable to see the life in any other way than the scientific way, unless that person also cultivates different viewpoints. Or, I say a scientist because it's my experience and I've been with many scientists, but that is the case with anybody. When we begin to see the world in a certain way, we generate a habit of perception that eventually conditions our perception. So this happens after death. All that way of perceiving things becomes stronger. This is also why it is important not to Krishnamurti, for example, who was a contemporary philosopher related to the TS. He always denounced the fragmentation in our education. He always said that an important problem in life is that we fragment our perception and we think as a scientist or as a politician or as whatever we are. And that becomes an important conditioning in our consciousness. If we try to have an open mind and we try to appreciate different aspects of life, then this conditioning will not become so marked, because we will have always different avenues to appreciate or to perceive life. So Annie Besant says, hence the importance of not creating trivial mental images and letting them dwell in the mind. These will persist and form channels for future outpourings of mental force as the paths of least resistance. And many times we generate a habit just because of carelessness. We are maybe in a family or with a person or in a situation or a country where people think in that way, and we just assume that way of thinking, and then, as we saw in the first classes, they become conditioning. So far we saw aspirations, and we can see here in the chart, we saw that aspirations and desires in the sense of aspiration, become capacities, and repeated thoughts become tendencies of thinking, tendencies of perceiving. So then Annie Besant talks about unfulfilled will or desire. And she says the will or desire to perform a certain action, such will or desire having been frustrated, not by want of ability, but by want of opportunity, or by circumstances forbidding accomplishment, will cause mental images which, if the action be of a high and pure nature, will be acted out in thought on the devachanic plane, and will be precipitated as actions on returning to earth. The physical act is inevitable when the mental image has been realized as action on the devachanic plane. So the desire to do something when we don't have the opportunity to. Maybe some people would like to help, to be able to help, but the current circumstances don't allow it. The person may be in charge of a family or a business, or may not have the physical strength or the mental strength. For whatever reason, if the person just doesn't have the opportunity to do it, that desire will generate in the opportunities in the future. That person will be born in a country or a family or a circumstance in which he or she will be able to do what he desired to do. This both on a higher or lower aspect. If a person wants to be a leader of something and has this ambition and doesn't have the opportunity because he doesn't have the right circumstances around, even if that person doesn't have the capacity, then in the next life he will be born in a situation where he can become a leader. Now the problem with the desires, this phrase, be careful of what you desire because you may be granted that desire. The problem is that then this person, if it was just out of ambition that he wanted to be the leader of something, will not be fit to be the leader of whatever opportunity he created by his own desire, and then he will generate a lot of bad karma for the future. So this is why we have to be very careful with what we desire. Many times we keep pushing life and asking for things that we are not ready really to do. It's just our ambition, our necessity to feel whatever we need to feel. And if we push life will respond and will bring the opportunity in the future. But then we won't be fit to take that opportunity, and then that opportunity is a curse more than a blessing. So if we desire things, if we have these aspirations, it should be something, a pure aspiration. A pure aspiration will never backfire. So not something that is based on personal ambition, personal desire, but the aspirations that have to do with our true nature, which is unity, they always will generate a situation that the soul can do something for others and also grow in the meantime. So Ed again. Yes, go ahead, Ed.
Is there really good and bad karma, or is there just karma we like and karma we don't like?
Yes, I tend to see it that way many times. What we think is bad karma, because I mean we call bad karma something that brings suffering or frustration, and call good karma something that we like, that brings pleasure or the ability to do something. But many times it is just the opposite. In the case of this unworthy leader, for example, he would regard good karma, the possibility of being, the boss, and that is actually bad karma, because that would generate more suffering in the future. Or a person may be put in a situation that is very unpleasant, but that may be a very good karma for the person, because that may be how that person is developing all these abilities that will be with him as a soul for all eternity. So good karma and bad karma is very relative. We would say pleasant karma or unpleasant karma, and many times, as I said, they are the opposite to what we would think. So she says was talking about the higher desires, that in Devachan all these desires have the opportunity to be fulfilled in a certain sense, and then they will be fulfilled on the physical plane. And then she says the same law applies to mental images formed out of baser desires, though these never pass into Devachan, but they are subjective to the process before described, the idea that they are repeated on the astral plane, to be reformed or formed again on the way back to earth. Repeated covetous desires, for instance, out of which mental images are formed, will crystallize out as acts of theft when circumstances are propitious. The causative karma is complete, and the physical act has become the inevitable effect. She actually says that the desire, for example, to steal on the astral plane, if that was part of an important part of the consciousness in the person, on the astral plane will keep on repeating itself, and that will generate the person to be born in a situation where stealing is possible and even encouraged. So what we desire will be produced in the future. Nature always answers our desires. Maybe not right now in this life, but it will be in the next one. So Annie Besant says that this sometimes produces a sense of, well, then this person doesn't have the opportunity to choose. And we see that many times. Some people are born in a situation where it's very difficult that they could do anything different. And Annie Besant explained, the freedom of choice has been exhausted in choosing over and over again to make the mental image, and the physical is constrained to obey the mental impulse. So that person chose to feed that kind of mental image, and at a certain point it becomes an inevitable cause, a cause that will produce an inevitable effect. So she says, it must not be forgotten that the repetition of an act tends to make the act automatic, and this law works on planes other than the physical. If then an action be constantly repeated on the psychic plane, in our mind and emotions, it will become automatic, and when opportunity offers, will automatically be imitated on the physical. She says in the book, she gives this example of people that they do things, wrong things, and they say, I would not do it or have done it if I had thought of it. It just happened. And Annie Besant says they are completely right. It's not that they wanted to do it, but they set up the cause previously, and then it's inevitable to do it. This also brings an important teaching as to how to deal with ourselves. In another book, I think it was in another book, Annie Besant says that what we actually do in life is the result of the past, not the present. If you do something wrong right now, it's not your present, it's your past, what was generated in the past that is manifesting now, and it's inevitable. What is your present is what you want to do, what you really wanted to do. That is your present. So sometimes we want to do the right thing and we end up doing the wrong thing. But that doing the wrong thing is the effect from the past. It's not generating a karma for the future if you were trying to do the right thing. If you were trying to do the right thing, you are generating a good karma for the future, if we want to talk in those terms. So this is why the mental, the inner motivation is always the one that generates karma, not the physical action. Now, if you do something wrong and you wanted to do something wrong, you are angry at a person and you attack the person and you just wanted to attack the person, then you are increasing that circle and that tendency for revenge. But if you start trying to do something different, even if you cannot do it, you are generating a different karma for the future. And so if we really understand this, it's easier to position ourselves in this state of witnessing and awareness, in the sense of we are aware of the personality. That awareness opens the door to try to do the best, but if the best doesn't happen, there is not this sense of guilt and everything that is associated with that. You see it as something inevitable. I mean, you try to do your best, and then the result is not in your hands. The present result is the result of the past. What is really in your hand is your current attitude, and you are generating the future result. I know we are a little over the time, but we are finishing. Let us try to finish this section, and then we can discuss a little more. So Annie Besant says, over all these things, the soul ponders when in Devachan, and by its own alchemy, it changes all this mixture of experiences into the gold of wisdom, so that it may return to earth as a wiser soul. Many such experiences teach it that gratifications sought against law are but wombs of pain, and when in some new earth life the desired body would fain carry the soul into enjoyment which is evil, the memory of past experiences asserts itself as conscience and cries out loud its forbiddance, and reins in the herring horses of the senses that would plunge heedlessly after the objects of desire. So this is how the conscience works that we talked at the beginning. So this is basically, then we have this chart. We saw that wills to perform, to do something, become actually the opportunity to do those things in the future. And then experiences become wisdom, and the painful experiences become conscience, which is what Annie Besant was just talking right now. The experience of pain in the past becomes this warning conscience in the present. So that's it for tonight. Now we can go to question and answers or comments before we close. In our next class, Annie Besant will explain how these things actually are manifested on the physical plane. In this chapter we saw mainly how the karmic causes are produced and the effect that they tend to have. But then in the next one we will see the mechanism. So is there any comment or question about this? Diana is typing there. We'll wait for her to finish. No, she's not asking anything. Okay. Yes, it's very interesting. I find, I mean, when we understand all these processes, it's always a support for our minds, because the one that is confused is the mind. The mind, is confused as to how to interpret the world, how to relate to ourselves. So when the mind sees these explanations and they make sense, it's a support for the mind to stop going in a certain direction, so that our awareness can, has a field that is not going into the wrong direction so actively. So it helps. So Janet says, very good, much to try to live up to. Yes, of course. I mean, knowing these things for most people is important to bring awareness. Then the actual ability to not to be dragged by the emotions and the lower nature requires work. So just knowing about this is not going necessarily to change that. But as I said, it's a support for the change in direction. So we have to be patient, and again, remember, just keep trying, because the aspirations and desires become capacities. So if we resonate with this, and this is our ideal, or this becomes an ideal for us, then just try to do it and forget about the results. Don't worry about the results. Don't worry if you can or cannot do it. Because as we saw in the first class, this is a law. Annie Besant said that there is a law on the inner planes that is you cannot break. And although some people may feel constrained by the law, she said, if you know how these laws work, then you can use them for your benefit. So if this is a law, there is no way that if you try, you are not going to receive to produce a result. Again, may not be in this lifetime, or maybe depending on many factors, but you just try it and don't worry about the result. Any aspiration eventually becomes a capacity. Yes, go ahead, Ed.
How do you avoid the ego co-opting this information and saying, "Oh, good, I can now control my environment better, and I could rise to the greatness which I am."
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's probably how these teachings are taken at first in general, and you can see even in the New Age teachings many times all this is turned as a tool to satisfy desires. All this idea that we can really control our destiny. Then they say, okay, then if I want a car, I just have to desire the car, and then I'll have a car. And it's not untrue. Maybe you won't have a car in this lifetime. You will have a car or a spaceship in your future life, whatever. But the problem is that because that came from a selfish point of view, that will generate frustration. So the way to counteract that is just with maturity, and unfortunately many times the maturity comes with experience. The soul learns that, yeah, this may be true, but as long as I'm working through identify with the personal nature, then this is not going to produce happiness. Anyway, it produces suffering. So it's good to keep this in mind that you are saying, and it all, to me, it all depends on the level of awareness that a person works on. Because from a higher point of view, what you see here is that if you try, you recognize that you are identified with the personality, and that the personality is not what we really are, or it's just a fragment of the whole that we are. So the aspiration is to perceive what we really are. So in that sense, that won't produce a thickening of the ego, but on the contrary, it will produce this ability to perceive that we are not the ego. So it all depends on what level the person works. But especially the way Annie Besant sees, and several times she talks about this, she says, if that is the level at which a person is working, then that person needs to go through the results of that level. So if a person, all that person can grasp from this is this very self-centered idea that then I can control my destiny, then the soul has to go through that experience, and the soul will be able to, after repeated experiences, will be able to absorb the essence of the teaching. The essence of the teaching is, yes, desire produces a result, but with experience will be the learning that personal desire will not bring happiness, because the focus on the fragment is opposed to the truth that we are not the fragment, that we are the whole. So I think it's good to keep this in mind as you mention it, and that we always have to mention it here and there, that this shouldn't be taken as from the ego point of view. But at the same time, it seems to be part of the growing, the process of growth. Any other comment or question before we close? All right, a lot to think, I guess. I always enjoy these kind of books, and give a lot of food for thinking and pondering over. As I did last week, I will send a proposed exercise if you want to try to, to use this book to pay attention to specific aspects of life, or the spiritual life. So I'll send a proposed exercise in case you want to try. Thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope you have a great week. See you next Tuesday. Bye bye.